That night, the world slept. But in a dimly lit hospital room, trembling hands pressed together in desperate prayer. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song, indifferent to the breaking heart beneath them. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware that someone was bargaining with God. The mother's knees ached against the cold linoleum floor. She had been there for hours, her whispered pleas rising into the sterile air like incense without an altar. Her daughter lay motionless in the bed behind her, machines breathing for her, beeping in a rhythm that mocked the silence of heaven. 3 days had passed since the accident. 3 days of praying. 3 days of silence. Was God truly listening? In another part of the city, a man sat alone in his empty apartment. The eviction notice lay crumpled on the floor beside him. His phone, turned off to avoid the creditors, rested like a dead thing on the table. He had lost his job 6 months ago, lost his savings 4 months ago, lost his pride 2 months ago. Now, in the darkness before dawn, he had nothing left to lose but his faith. His lips moved without sound, forming words he had spoken since childhood. Prayers that once brought comfort, but now felt like messages sent into a void. Could faith survive when silence was the only answer? The single mother worked the night shift at the convenience store, her Bible open beneath the counter. Between customers, she read the Psalms, searching for words that matched her exhaustion. Her son was falling into the wrong crowd. She saw it happening, day by day, like watching a slow-motion drowning. She prayed every night, claimed every promise, spoke every scripture over him. Yet he grew more distant, more angry, more lost. The distance between her prayers and God's intervention seemed to widen with each passing week. She had always believed that persistent prayer moved mountains. But what happens when the mountain refuses to move? These souls, scattered across the sleeping city, shared a common burden. Not the dramatic crisis of those who cry out once in desperation, but the grinding weight of those who have cried out 1,000 times. They were the faithful who had discovered that faith sometimes means continuing to speak into darkness, long after your voice has grown hoarse. The hospital mother remembered when prayer felt powerful. She remembered the electricity of answered petitions, the joy of miraculous interventions. She had seen God move before, witnessed healings, experienced provisions that defied logic. But now, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall only because machines willed it so, those memories felt like stories from someone else's life. At 3 a.m., doubt whispers loudest. The mother's mind began constructing arguments against everything she had built her life upon. If God is good, why this? If God is powerful, why wait? If God loves her, why silence? The questions came not from rebellion, but from the raw honesty of exhaustion. She was too tired to maintain the spiritual facade, too broken to speak in the polished language of Sunday morning faith. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I don't understand why you're not here." But was he not there? Or was he there in ways her pain could not yet perceive? The unemployed man opened his eyes in the darkness. His prayer had dissolved into silent waiting, and in that waiting, a memory surfaced. His grandfather, a man who had survived war and poverty, once told him, "God's delays are not God's denials, boy. Sometimes he's not late. We're just early in our understanding." The words had meant nothing then. Now, sitting in his empty apartment with nothing but hope as thin as spider silk, they were all he had. He didn't feel faith. He felt desperation. But perhaps, he thought, perhaps desperation that refuses to let go is itself a form of faith. The night pressed against the windows of the city. In that sacred hour between midnight and dawn, when the world holds its breath, something shifted. Not in circumstances, not in the external realities that burdened these souls, but in the invisible realm where surrender meets divine timing. The mother at the hospital didn't hear a voice, didn't see a sign, but her hands, clasped so tightly they had gone numb, slowly relaxed. The prayer changed, not from request to acceptance, but from demand to trust. "I don't understand," she prayed, "but I'm here. I'm still here. That has to mean something." Tears fell freely now, no longer held back by pride or spiritual performance. In her brokenness, she discovered a truth that cannot be taught, only experienced. Sometimes the prayer is not about changing God's mind, but about changing our capacity to receive what He has already prepared. Did her daughter wake that night? No. Did the machines stop their mechanical breathing? No. But something broke loose in the mother's spirit, a release, not of hope, but of control, not of faith, but of the need to dictate its timeline. The single mother at the convenience store closed her Bible and looked out at the empty street. Her son was still lost. Her prayers still seemed to bounce off heaven's closed doors. But in that moment, she remembered something she had forgotten in her desperation. She was not praying alone. Somewhere, other mothers prayed for sons they were losing. Other fathers pleaded for daughters who had walked away. The communion of the desperate, the fellowship of those who refuse to stop knocking even when their knuckles bleed. She was part of something larger than her individual pain. "I'm not alone in this," she whispered. The revelation didn't change her circumstances, but it changed her isolation. When does faith become most real? Not in the moment of answered prayer, but in the moment when we choose to maintain it despite the silence. Not when we feel God's presence, but when we honor His character in His absence. The midnight prayers of the desperate are not wasted words sent into emptiness. They are the refinement of trust, the purification of motive, the strengthening of hope. The man in the apartment stood and walked to his window. Dawn was still an hour away, but the darkness had begun to thin at its edges. He didn't know how he would pay rent, didn't know where provision would come from. But in the pre-dawn stillness, he made a decision. He would continue. One more day, one more prayer, one more choice to believe that silence does not mean absence. Across the city, in hospital rooms and empty apartments, in cars and closets and quiet corners, others made the same choice. Not because they felt strong, but because surrender to despair felt like a greater death than continuing to hope. Their prayers were not eloquent. Many were barely coherent. Some were just the repetition of a name. Jesus. 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 But what is prayer, truly? Is it the persuading of a reluctant deity? Or is it the aligning of a desperate heart with eternal purpose? Is it changing God's mind? Or is it the process by which our minds are changed, our perspectives shifted, our spirits prepared to receive what divine wisdom has already ordained? The hospital mother finally climbed from the floor. Her knees protested, stiff from hours of kneeling. She approached her daughter's bed and took the limp hand in hers. The machines continued their rhythm. The monitors displayed their unchanging numbers. But the mother's grip communicated what words could not. I'm here. I'm still here. And so is he, even when I cannot feel it. Faith in the midnight hour looks different than faith in the morning light. It is stripped of confidence, devoid of certainty, cleansed of presumption. It is the bare thread by which we dangle over the abyss and the stubborn refusal to let go even when our hands grow weak. This is the faith that moves God. Not the faith of those who have never doubted, but the faith of those who doubt and choose belief anyway. The night began to surrender to dawn. The darkness that had seemed eternal slowly gave way to the first hints of light. It happened so gradually that no single moment marked the transition. One moment it was night, and then, imperceptibly, it wasn't anymore. The unemployed man watched the sunrise through his window. It came, as it always did, without asking permission, without needing his faith to make it happen. The thought struck him with unexpected force. What if God's faithfulness is like that? Not dependent on my ability to feel it, see it, or even believe it, but constant regardless. At the hospital, a nurse entered for the routine morning check. The mother stepped back, allowing her to work. The nurse, whose own faith had been tested by years of witnessing suffering, glanced at the woman's face and saw something familiar there. The exhaustion of those who pray without ceasing. The hollowness of those who have poured out everything and wait for refilling. "She's stable," the nurse said softly, checking the monitors. That's something. Was it? Or was stability simply another word for unchanging circumstances? The mother didn't know. But she nodded anyway, accepting the small mercy of no worse. The single mother's shift ended as the sun rose. She drove home through streets beginning to fill with morning traffic. Her son would still be asleep when she arrived, if he had come home at all. The same fears waited for her. The same unanswered prayers. But she had survived another night. That, too, was something. What transforms midnight prayer from desperate bargaining into sacred trust? Perhaps it is the recognition that we are not the first to pray in darkness. Before us, countless others have knelt in the night, have whispered into silence, have waited for dawn, both literal and spiritual. We join a procession of the faithful that stretches back through centuries, a communion of those who discovered that God's presence is not measured by his immediacy. Job, sitting in ashes, his world destroyed, his body broken, still spoke into the darkness. David, fleeing from those who sought his life, still composed songs in caves. Hannah, barren and mocked, still brought her empty womb before the altar. The widow, down to her last meal, still obeyed the prophet's instruction. They did not pray from positions of strength, but from depths of desperation. And their midnight became morning not when circumstances changed, but when their perspective transformed. The man in the apartment made coffee, though he had no breakfast to accompany it. The routine felt important, a way of declaring normalcy in the midst of chaos. As he waited for the water to boil, his phone caught his eye. Still turned off, still avoiding. But as the first light of dawn filled his kitchen, he felt a shift in his spirit. Not a voice, not a vision, just a quiet knowing. Today, turn it on. Was this divine guidance or simple practicality? Did it matter? Sometimes faith is not about hearing God's voice, but about taking the next obvious step and trusting that he meets us in the movement. He powered on the phone. It came to life with a series of beeps and notifications. Most were what he expected: collection calls, overdue notices, reminders of failure. But among them, one email stood out. A former colleague reaching out about a contract position. Not permanent, not what he had lost, but something. A crack in the wall, a thin beam of light penetrating his darkness. His hands trembled as he read it. Was this the answer to months of prayer? Or just a coincidence? The question felt suddenly irrelevant. Whether divine intervention or random chance, he could choose to see it as an opportunity. That choice itself was an act of faith. At the hospital, the mother had finally fallen asleep in the chair beside her daughter's bed. The exhaustion of the night had overwhelmed her, and her body had simply shut down. She slept fitfully, her hand still holding her daughter's, their fingers intertwined in a grip that spoke of refusal. Refusal to let go. Refusal to accept the worst. Refusal to stop believing that morning would eventually come. In her dreams, she walked through a garden at night. She was searching for something, though she couldn't remember what. The darkness was total, but she wasn't afraid. Someone walked beside her, though she couldn't see them. Their presence was enough. She didn't need sight when she had company. "Where are we going?" she asked in the dream. "Forward," the companion answered. "Always forward." "But I can't see." "I know. Walk anyway." When she woke, the dream faded immediately, as dreams do. But the feeling remained. The sense that she was not walking alone, even when she could not see the path. Even when the destination remained unclear. The presence was enough. Is this not the essence of faith? To walk forward in darkness, not because we see the way, but because we trust the guide? To continue speaking into silence, not because we hear the answer, but because we believe in the listener. The single mother arrived home to find her son sitting at the kitchen table. This itself was unusual. He was rarely awake at this hour, and when he was, he avoided her. But there he sat, staring at his hands, looking smaller and younger than his 17 years. "Mom," he said without looking up. His voice carried something she hadn't heard in months: vulnerability. "I need to talk." Her heart, so practiced in prayer, sent up a wordless cry of gratitude. Not because the battle was over, but because the wall had developed a crack. Because her son, who had been unreachable, was reaching. This was not the dramatic salvation she had prayed for, but it was movement. And movement, after months of stagnation, felt like resurrection. She sat across from him, silent, giving him space to find words. The prayers of countless nights had not been wasted. They had been planting seeds in soil she could not see, watering roots she could not measure. Now, finally, the first tender shoot broke through the surface. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I don't know how to stop." "Stop what, baby?" "Everything. The people I'm with. The things I'm doing. I want to stop, but I don't know how." He powered on the phone. It came to life with a series of beeps and notifications. Most were what he expected: collection calls, overdue notices, reminders of failure. But among them, one email stood out. A former colleague reaching out about a contract position. Not permanent, not what he had lost, but something. A crack in the wall, a thin beam of light penetrating his darkness. His hands trembled as he read it. Was this the answer to months of prayer, or just a coincidence? The question felt suddenly irrelevant. Whether divine intervention or random chance, he could choose to see it as an opportunity. That choice itself was an act of faith. At the hospital, the mother had finally fallen asleep in the chair beside her daughter's bed. The exhaustion of the night had overwhelmed her, and her body had simply shut down. She slept fitfully, her hand still holding her daughter's, their fingers intertwined in a grip that spoke of refusal. Refusal to let go. Refusal to accept the worst. Refusal to stop believing that morning would eventually come. In her dreams, she walked through a garden at night. She was searching for something, though she couldn't remember what. The darkness was total, But she wasn't afraid. Someone walked beside her, though she couldn't see them. Their presence was enough. She didn't need sight when she had company. "Where are we going?" she asked in the dream. "Forward," the companion answered. "Always forward." "But I can't see." "I know. Walk anyway." When she woke, the dream faded immediately, as dreams do. But the feeling remained. The sense that she was not walking alone, even when she could not see the path. Even when the destination remained unclear. The presence was enough. Is this not the essence of faith? To walk forward in darkness, not because we see the way, but because we trust the guide. To continue speaking into silence, not because we hear the answer, but because we believe in the listener. The single mother arrived home to find her son sitting at the kitchen table. This itself was unusual. He was rarely awake at this hour, and when he was, he avoided her. But there he sat, staring at his hands, looking smaller and younger than his 17 years. "Mom," he said without looking up. His voice carried something she hadn't heard in months. Vulnerability. "I need to talk." Her heart, so practiced in prayer, sent up a wordless cry of gratitude. Not because the battle was over, but because the wall had developed a crack. Because her son, who had been unreachable, was reaching. This was not the dramatic salvation she had prayed for, but it was movement. And movement, after months of stagnation, felt like resurrection. She sat across from him, silent, giving him space to find words. The prayers of countless nights had not been wasted. They had been planting seeds in soil she could not see, watering roots she could not measure. Now, finally, the first tender shoot broke through the surface. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I don't know how to stop." "Stop what, baby?" "Everything. The people I'm with, the things I'm doing. I want to stop, but I don't know how." The mother's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. This moment was too fragile for the weight of her emotion. "Then we'll figure it out together," she said simply. "One step at a time." Was this the answer to her prayers? Yes and no. It was not the instant transformation she had hoped for, but it was the beginning of transformation, which is often more valuable. Instant change rarely lasts, but change that comes through struggle, through choice, through the painful work of turning, that change has roots. The dawn had fully arrived now, painting the city in shades of gold and pink. In hospital rooms and apartments, in cars and homes, those who had prayed through the night faced a new day. Their circumstances had not all changed. Daughters still lay unconscious. Bills remained unpaid. Children were still lost in ways that would take time to remedy. But something had shifted. Not in the external world, but in the internal landscape where faith takes root. They had survived the night. They had chosen to continue praying even when prayer felt futile. They had spoken into silence and trusted that silence was not emptiness. The hospital mother woke fully as a doctor entered the room. She straightened in her chair, her heart immediately racing. The doctor's face was neutral, giving nothing away. He checked the monitors, made notes on his tablet, examined the patient with practiced efficiency. "Any change?" the mother asked, her voice rough from sleep and tears. The doctor looked at her, and his professional mask softened slightly. "Too soon to tell," he said, "but her vital signs have stabilized more than we expected. It's not improvement, but it's not deterioration either." In cases like these, stability is the foundation that improvement builds on. Hope, the mother had learned, comes in unexpected packages. Not always as the grand miracle, but sometimes as the small mercy, not always as the dramatic reversal, but sometimes as the gentle stabilization. Not always as the shout of victory, but sometimes as the whisper of not worse. She took it, this small offering, this modest update. She took it and held it close, a single coal to warm her frozen hope. The unemployed man responded to the email. His hands shook as he typed, fear and hope warring in his chest. It wasn't the job he had lost, wasn't the salary he needed, but it was opportunity knocking, and he had learned in the darkness of midnight that sometimes faith means opening the door even when you can't see who's on the other side. The single mother and her son sat at the kitchen table until the sun was fully risen. They talked about things they hadn't discussed in months, about fears and failures, about wanting to change and not knowing how, about shame and forgiveness. It wasn't easy. There were long silences and hard truths. But they were talking, and talking was the first step toward healing. What is the purpose of midnight prayer? Is it to change God or to change us? Is it to inform the omniscient or to transform the desperate? Perhaps it is the crucible in which superficial faith is burned away, leaving only the essential truth. We need Him more than we need answers. We need His presence more than we need His intervention. The prayers of the desperate are not polished. They are not theologically precise. They often contain more questions than declarations, more doubt than certainty, more pain than praise. But they are real, and reality, raw and unvarnished, seems to penetrate heaven in ways that religious performance cannot. As the city fully awakened, as the night shift ended and the day shift began, as people moved into their routines and responsibilities, those who had prayed through the darkness carried something with them. A knowledge that could not be taught, only earned. The knowledge that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the choice to trust despite it. That prayer is not the manipulation of divine will, but the surrender to divine wisdom. That silence is not rejection, but sometimes the sacred space in which transformation occurs. The hospital mother stood up and stretched her sore muscles. She went to the window and stared out at the morning. Somewhere in this city, others had prayed through the night. Others had prayed through the night somewhere in this city. Others had chosen to continue believing even when belief felt like foolishness. She was part of something larger than herself, part of the great chorus of the desperate, the faithful, the stubbornly hopeful. Her daughter still lay motionless. The machines still breathed for her. But the mother felt different. Not stronger, exactly. Not more certain, but more surrendered. More willing to trust a timeline she could not control. More ready to accept that God's ways, as the ancient text promised, were higher than hers. She returned to the bedside and took her daughter's hand again. "I'm still here," she whispered. "We're still here, all of us, and we're not letting go." The true answer did not arrive when they expected it, but when they were ready to receive it. And sometimes, the readiness is the miracle itself.